Okay, today my little Kaveny's event is going to be kind of discursive, I guess, because I watched the video production from last week and I'm really excited about it. And among other things, my gubernatorial candidate, Mike McCabe, who I mentioned to you in the last video, which is now up on my Facebook account, made the cutoff mark so that he will be appearing as one of the top 4 candidates on Wisconsin public television. I just put up the previous video that I made on my Facebook account. You can find me easily there, or on my YouTube channel. And I want to say that this is invigorating. I was telling my associate that we are giving them, her generation, young millennials, a much harder, colder, crueler world than we had. Like I can remember, for example, that I got my first Social Security card in 1959 when I was 15 and working for a bottling company. And I thought, God, does this mean I'm going to have to work for the next 50 years? Well, it didn't, because I retired at 55. And at one point, I remember I got a Social Security earnings statement. And between 1962 and 1972, that's a 10-year period of my life, I think I had a total of $7,000 income for that whole 10-year period. And all I can say is I got a lot of free food, I got a lot of help from my friends, I got little bits of money from my family for staying away from family get-togethers, and I drank a lot of free beer before I quit. But that would be virtually impossible now. I wasn't homeless. I mean, I sort of had a little apartment that my mother paid the rent for both my brother and I, who were kind of in different degrees of disposed, but you know, it was something that you could come back from. And I remember that in 1971, I got offered what they called then a civil service job, which has been pretty much wrecked now, which involved union protection, benefits, and a benefit-specific retirement plan from the state of Wisconsin, which is one of the best retirement plans in the country. This gets a little technical, but I'm going to go through it. We were able then, because it was thought that if you worked for the government, well, then you were giving up an awful lot, because you could make a lot more in the private sector. And so if that was true, in order to keep people working, then you would give them other sorts of things. You'd give them benefits, because you wanted to have good civil servants. And you wanted to have the best people working for the state, to doing the necessary things that sort of civilizes. All right, I just noticed this really kind of a funny thing. I'm getting into studying the Vietnam War. It's been, as I mentioned in my previous video, I'm taking Dr. Ducksworth's History of Vietnam course, and it's sort of started my fire. It's sort of taken things that I lived through, that I may have studied in academically, and it's caused me to kind of think about them in terms of my own life events, and then at the same time put these historical events into a broader context. Okay, I'm talking about civil service, and I've been watching, studying a lot of these C-SPAN videos, and one of them involves several couple-hour talks by the late Robert M. McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and then Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he was responsible for much of our Vietnam policy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him, but I'm going to pull back a little bit and say he died in 2009. But I watch him talk on these videos, and he's sort of like me. And that he'll say, well, I just have to, he'll be answering a question, but he'll just have to tell the person he's talking to about this other thing that's like really neat. And for example, the Secretary of Defense of the United States in 1960, his salary was $25,000 a year. That's $25,000 a year. That's like, if you put that into an hourly wage, the secretary cabinet position in the United States government, responsible for the defense of the most powerful nation in the earth, on the earth, was making $25,000 a year. He was making like less than 20 bucks an hour. And that was a time when we would complain because my father, as executive secretary of the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, was making a lousy $15,000 a year, and we had to take the bus. Well, Robert M. McNamara, at the time of his death, after he finished his stint as president of the World Bank, died with a fortune of $200 million. So he knew how to use his political connections. But what I'm trying to get into is the idea that there was a time when you didn't do something for money so much, you did it because it was the thing to do. I had another uncle, his name's Pete Dunn. He's of the Robert M. McNamara generation. He was born in 1907. He was my oldest uncle. And my family was dirt poor Irish on my mother's side. And my uncle my grandmother would wash my uncle's white shirt out every day. So he would have a clean white shirt so he could go to the class at University of Wisconsin, Madison, and I guess it was like a Spanish and business major or something like that. Well, by about 30 years later, my Uncle Pete had clawed himself up to the point where he was president of a $500 million corporation. It was called a rediscount corporation, and they basically secured loans that people could not secure on their own. And at that particular point, he was making the amazing sum of $1,000 a week. And now my wife and I make several times that amount of money. But what I'm getting to is it was a time when you couldn't make that amount of money. Wealth wasn't concentrated the same way as it is now. One of the probably most grievous things that I can think of that's happened, there's a book sitting on my shelf called Capital. And it's by a French analyst by the name of Piketty. And Piketty talks about one of the things that happened is people thought that maybe if they would publish the amount of money that corporate executives were making, that they would be ashamed. They would think, boy, I'm making, several $1 million a year, and a corporation that lost billions of dollars. Maybe I should keep my mouth shut. But what's happened is there's now sort of a competition, so that if someone is making, it's like, I looked up what college football coaches make now. And I was astounded to see that of the top 100 NCAA college football coach teams in the ranking, the lowest coaching salary that anybody made was a little less than $1 million. And the ones at the top, well, the Big Ten coaches and some of the other coaches are making $7 or $8 million a year. And this is for a Phi Ed major, for God's sake, And I don't know how we're going to change that, but I think you have to think of an ethic where what Kennedy said, that we don't do these things because we're easy, we do them because they're hard. And this idea of asking now what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country was not a joke. Well, there seems to be a kind of a continuity between these videos, and I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to go with the real-time such, and I'm going to report on the McCabe campaign, my study of the Vietnam War, and my whole need to get myself out and supported and funded as a public intellectual, you crowdsourced people, so that we can actually do this. Because by God, this is worthwhile.